What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Edge of Memories, an upcoming JRPG that is supposed to be coming out sometime in Q4 from Midgar Studio and being published by Nacon. In particular, I'm bringing you this video via a demo that is available as part of the ongoing Steam Next Fest up until the 22nd. I think the demo for this is going to continue to be available afterwards, but I'm not entirely sure. Now, admittedly, as a game, I think this seems fine if you like sort of action-oriented JRPGs, but there are a couple of things going on here that I wanted to ultimately cover, and that's why I'm making a dedicated video out of this. One of those being that I discovered this game is actually a sequel of sorts to another game called Edge of Eternity, which was a Kickstarter project also from Midgar Studio. And that definitely informs a bit of the story here, but mostly people seem to think that game was pretty to look at, but maybe a little too ambitious for its own good, while also being a bit buggy. However, of note to me there is how it influences the story. You see the story of the original game. An alien force assaulted this planet, which resulted in, of course, a massive war that, towards the end of it, it seems the invaders unleashed a plague of sorts, or a disease known as the corrosion. The corrosion has taken over a great many life forms as it twists and mutates basically anything living, and that has effectively decimated one of the world's continents. This game, Edge of Memories, takes place on a continent that is just now starting to deal with the problem known as avarice. So even at the beginning of this game, like half of the world, give or take, has fallen into shambles, and everyone's really just trying to get by. Which then brings us to Edge of Memories itself, which puts us in the role of a young woman who, I believe her name is Aline. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but this woman is a soul whisperer. And she goes around solving problems where she can, both literally solving them in terms of dealing with people's issues like monsters and the like. However, she is also able to sort of enter the world of someone's soul, you could say, and rid them of their problems that way. However, a bit of a twist at the end of the demo, which itself is like an hour or two long, kind of gives you the rest of the story here. And slight spoilers here, I guess, but it is just the beginning of the game after all. You see, Aline is actually dealing with some memory loss as you meet a guy named Yosaurus along the way, who informs you that you've actually met before because he spent the last several years looking for you, only to realize that you don't seem to remember much of anything at all. Which is a shame because apparently the woman we're playing as had the ability to just like fully manipulate the corrosion. This allowed her to heal people who had been infected by it and even transform into a beast that uses it without any consequences. And it's this that we're going to, of course, use to actually start tackling the problem and get to the bottom of everything. So far, so good, even if it does take a little bit to actually get to that point in terms of playing the demo itself. Now, where we start running into some problems are a little bit in the presentation. I think some of the UI could use some work, to be honest with you. There was also this weird glitch in the demo that you may well have seen already where some of the terrain fails to load in and you get these like weird squares everywhere. And it also wasn't really until the end of the demo where combat started to actually feel good with its action-oriented approach. So let's talk a little bit about that. As you defeat enemies, you'll gain experience and start leveling up. You won't necessarily notice it right away, but these level ups are going to grant you essentially a skill point that you can then spend on this skill tree, which will unlock combos you can perform with your weapons. This will, of course, make combat a little more impactful as the basic attacks are relatively underwhelming. Once you get Yosaurus in your party, and there is supposed to be one other person that didn't make an appearance in the demo, but either way, you can assign abilities that they can perform in combat as well, usually big attacks with elemental effects. And once you start unlocking progression, you can swap between strategies, as it calls them, which allows them to use different abilities at the same time, and mixing and matching their effects and everything. And there's also some gear you'll get your hands on, which will have extra effects, giving you buffs and the like, and you can eventually mix up potions via gathering ingredients as you move through an area. And these potions will provide you extra effects in combat as well, like giving you extra health bars or extra damage, that kind of thing. So far, so good. Seems relatively normal for this kind of game, if anything. Like I said, it took until the end of the demo where you actually start getting access to some of those systems for it to feel good. But how that feels over the course of the entire thing would be the kind of thing you would be looking to evaluate evaluate there. But there's also a couple more things, but relatively basic as well. You've got to dodge out of the way, you've got light, heavy attacks, enemies have armor and weaknesses, of course, that you'll have to exploit. Later on, towards the very end of the demo, you get a berserk mode, and you'll build up a rage bar by hitting things in combat, and then you can spin that rage by using this beast form to perform finishers and deal massive amounts of damage and cut through some more tanky enemies, which is of note because some of them are quite tanky. There are difficulty settings for this, basically story and classic, and in both cases I would say enemies feel a little bit too much like a damage sponge, especially in the early game where you really only have a couple of basic attacks to spam, and it takes just way too long to kill things, with the dodge itself not necessarily feeling great at the same time. Now, beyond that stuff, another thing I wanted to mention was the exploration. So this is a more action-oriented title, yes, and there is a little bit of exploration to go with that. You'll be in these larger open areas, eventually you'll get like a mount to run around with, and there's a little bit of like platforming and jumping around to reaching individual spots of loot and the like, and this is where you can even find things like passive upgrades to add to your strategies to give some more variance to what individual party members may well bring to the table with their abilities. But much of exploration comes down to you gathering up crafting materials or interacting with the environment and doing some light platforming to get to those rewards. At campfires that you can find around, you can choose to rest and heal up, and you can also use those ingredients to produce potions, which will then let you use them in combat to produce all those effects I mentioned earlier. You can also use campfires to have conversations with your party members, but it does seem like that is going to be the bulk of it. I would assume there may well be like side quests and all that stuff later. We only get a brief shot in one little town and not for very long at that, so it's hard to say how fleshed out that is from this specifically. From there, I really only have a couple of other things I would like to mention, one of which being I do dig the art. I will say the UI doesn't always seem to match the individual bits of art, but the way they have presented things around, like the corrosion in particular, looks especially unsettling and compared and contrasted, perhaps intentionally, to the more pastel-oriented colors of the more peaceful aspects of the world you're exploring. Certainly makes for a few striking scenes at that. However, before I start wrapping this up, we do need to mention one other thing, and that is the fact that Nacon is publishing this. So if you're unaware, Nacon has been having a rough 2026 as they were declared insolvent and have been going through court proceedings to deal with all of that. They've had to shut down a few of their own studios. I do not believe they own Midgar Studio as far as I know, but obviously that whole process has had a very large impact on Nacon's business, and while they are not likely to go out of business just yet anyway, they seem to again be heading through court proceedings with that whole situation. It's definitely something to be aware of before you go looking at their games. So putting all of that together, Edge of Memories is doing one or two interesting things, but with no firm release date, it's really hard to say when we'll wind up seeing the full thing. However, I can say that for myself, it's the kind of game that I would cover if there's just like nothing else going on when it releases. I may well jump into it for a while and check it out. But from this demo, I'll say that it seems like a perfectly okay JRPG, and if the release date winds up being agreeable, I may well take a deeper look at it. But as for today's video, that is pretty much going to do it. Certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.